So, elitist Pete's presidential campaign was on the brink of death until the mainstream media wished a surge into existence, and then lo and behold, he started actually surging. It's almost like the mainstream media has way more influence than people realize. Now, at first, it was evident that they were overstating the surge, they were being overly hyperbolic, but after weeks of fawning coverage and nonstop praise, well, he now actually is surging. And it's to the point where I don't think we could ignore these numbers. This is pretty startling, actually. So, according to a CNN poll, he jumped to first place in Iowa and is now leading with 25%. That's 9 points ahead of the person in second place, and that's Elizabeth Warren. Now, it's not just Iowa, because in New Hampshire, he also jumped to first place there, and he's leading by 10 points, according to a St. Anselm College poll. Now, even though national polling only puts him at 8.3%, when you look at RCP averages in Iowa, well, he's taken the lead overall. And while he's not in first overall in New Hampshire as of yet, you can see a sharp increase, and he just recently passed Bernie Sanders. Now, they are still technically statistically tied at the moment, but nonetheless, he is on the same trajectory in New Hampshire that he was in Iowa. Now, the reason why Iowa and New Hampshire matter is because even though he doesn't have much support nationally, if a candidate wins Iowa and New Hampshire, that can propel that candidate with a lot of momentum to first place, and they could win the nomination. Barack Obama ended up winning Iowa, and that really propelled him to victory when everyone thought that Hillary Clinton already had the primary wrapped up back in 2008. So if he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, he could win the entire thing, which is really great news for Donald Trump, because out of head-to-head matchups tracked by Real Clear Politics, Pete Buttigieg has the worst chances against Donald Trump, with a 4.5% lead overall. Now, of course, that still is a lead nonetheless, but Hillary Clinton was also leading at the same point in time in 2015. But we all know how the 2016 election turned out. She ended up losing to Donald Trump. Now, the difference between Hillary Clinton and Pete Buttigieg is that at this point in time, she actually was polling higher against Donald Trump, with an average of 5.8 percentage points ahead of Donald Trump based on a sample of polls that I selected from that period. And yes, I did do the math and averaged these out. She was doing better than Pete Buttigieg. And when you compare Pete Buttigieg's general election matchups with other candidates, he performs the worst against Donald Trump. For example, Biden beats Trump on average by 10 points. Bernie beats Trump on average by almost 8 points and beats him in crucial Rust Belt states that Hillary Clinton lost. Warren beats Trump by 7.3 points on average. Even Kamala Harris beats Trump by 5.3 points. And when you look at all of the hypothetical matchups between Pete Buttigieg and Donald Trump, you can see that it's a toss-up. Trump wins about half the time. And the problem is that Donald Trump hasn't started going in on Pete Buttigieg yet. In the event he were to be the nominee, I think, it would be reasonable to expect Pete Buttigieg's numbers to plummet. Now, you need a really large cushion because I think that Donald Trump will be successful at possibly driving down support of whoever the Democratic Party nominee is. So you need to have someone as the nominee who can lose at least a couple of percentage points. But I think that Donald Trump would paint him as an elitist who's out of touch. Donald Trump would run his fake populist campaign again, and I think that Donald Trump would most likely drive down support for Pete Buttigieg and beat him. Now, you can argue that I'm wrong because polling says otherwise right now. Okay, that's fine. But again, just remember that Hillary Clinton was polling better than Pete Buttigieg is polling now against Donald Trump at this point in time. So, I don't know how else to describe this as be prepared for another 4 years of Donald Trump if Pete Buttigieg is the nominee. So, the problem is that the media, by propping up Pete Buttigieg in this way, they are inadvertently helping Donald Trump. Because if Donald Trump is going up against anyone, he should hope it's Pete Buttigieg. Because Pete Buttigieg fares the worst against him in head-to-head matchups. Now, Pete Buttigieg isn't doing any favors for himself because as he managed to move back into the spotlight, well, he's really letting his inner Republican show, which means that the Democratic Party base will be demoralized. They likely would stay home as they did for Hillary Clinton, not support him. He wouldn't have the support of young people, and that would pretty much guarantee that He's not going to be successful. Now, to give you, a little bit of examples of what I'm talking about here, he is using Republican talking points against Medicare for All, and he conspicuously turned on Medicare for All after the industry started donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to his campaign. He is now arguing against free college because millionaire and billionaire children will take advantage of free college. This is nothing more than pseudo-adversarialism because rich people's kids do not go to public schools, they go to private schools. And if he really was about, sticking it to the elites as he's trying to make you think he is here, he'd just be in favor of a wealth tax. And get this, his climate advisor is a fossil fuel-funded witness for the Trump administration's lawsuit against the children's climate change lawsuit. Great guy here. And on top of that, he also unironically floated the idea of sending U.S. troops to Mexico to combat gang and drug violence that is literally happening because of our war on drugs. So he's bad on the policy, and part of the reason that Pete Buttigieg shouldn't be propped up by the media is because you're not going to win this election without the support of black people, which he absolutely is struggling to win over for good reason because of scandals that are plaguing his campaign with regard to South Bend. And on top of that, you're not going to win if you don't have young people behind you. Young people are not on board with what Pete Buttigieg is offering, because even though he touts himself as the millennial who's going to bring about generational change, this is a millennial with boomer energy. He is not on board with what we want. And on top of that, he's proposing things that will not only demoralize young people and discourage them from voting, but he's proposing things that we are going to fucking hate, like a national service program. I mean, I'm sure that every millennial is just thrilled about this. Now, he also recently got booed by young people for disparaging Medicare for All. Take a look at this video.
That is why we need to deliver health care to every American, because you're not free if you don't have it. Now the way I would do it is to deliver Medicare for all who want it, take a version of that.
That was young people who was shouting him down, who was shouting Medicare for All at him. On top of that, when he thinks not very many people are watching, look at how condescending and dismissive he is to young people who are concerned about climate change. This is a video from the Sunrise Movement.
Do you support the Green New Deal?
Yeah, check out online so you can see how our idea of dealing with climate works.
So that was just
you can see my housing plan. I don't know about other people's, but you can read about mine.
It was just proposed in Congress.
Okay, well I just proposed mine, so you can start with mine and then compare.
Read yours.
Okay, do you think it matches up?
I don't.
Okay, well then I guess the answer is no.
I don't think it's bold or comprehensive enough to deal with the crisis we face for our climate.
Okay, I guess we don't agree. Thanks for coming.
I guess we don't.
So Pete Buttigieg is garbage, and you're not going to win without getting out that youth vote. You're not going to win without black people behind you, who are the most loyal constituency the Democratic Party has. Period. End of story. But the reason why Pete Buttigieg thinks he has a chance is because he has the most billionaire donors. There hasn't been a single candidate with as many billionaire donors as Pete Buttigieg, and he has done a number of fundraisers in the Hamptons with elites. So celebrities and billionaires love him. But if you don't have young people and black people behind you, you're not going to win. You will lose to Donald Trump, Pete Buttigieg. And no amount of cringeworthy high hopes dancing is going to get young people excited about you if you don't deliver on the policy substance. So Pete Buttigieg more and more is shifting to the right throughout the course of this primary after previously running as a progressive at the start. And this really isn't too surprising when you learn about his history, because there was recently a video that was uncovered of him praising the racist Tea Party movement because they were suddenly concerned about the quote-unquote direction the country was headed in once we elected a black president.
I have to admit, as a Democrat, that many of my friends and supporters looked at me as if I was absolutely nuts when I suggested that I would be coming tonight to speak with a group that's often identified with the Tea Party. There are some, especially in my party, who think that the Tea Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party. But there are many others who believe that the Tea Party is motivated by real concerns about the direction of our government and the responsiveness of our government to citizens, and above all, the frustration with business as usual.
So Pete Buttigieg is someone that we all should be concerned with, not just because, we wouldn't get a Bernie Sanders presidency, but because if we got a Pete Buttigieg Democratic Party nominee, Trump's going to win. I mean, that's obvious. That should be easy for everyone to see. Trump is going to win if he's the nominee. You don't have to believe me, but progressives very early on were talking about the viability and electability of someone like Hillary Clinton, who was a centrist. Now, I still thought that she was going to win against Donald Trump because Donald Trump was that incompetent, but I underestimated just how desperate people were and how demoralized some people were who didn't want to come out to vote, even if it meant defeating a fascist like Donald Trump. Pete Buttigieg is not going to win. And the worst part about Pete Buttigieg is that even if we manage to successfully defeat him in 2020, during the Democratic Party primary, that is, if he loses, he's going to be back every 4 to 8 years, and the mainstream media will continue to push him down our throats because he's a young person who they desperately want to be the first gay president. The New York Times was already coining him the first gay president, possibly back in 2016, before we even knew who he was nationally, before he even ran to be the DNC chairman. So this is someone who is going to be an influence on the Democratic Party for years to come, potentially, and he's a negative influence, and he's not looking out for anyone. He's looking out for himself. So this surge is something that really should concern everyone who wants to see change, who want to beat Donald Trump. Like, if we care about electability, then choosing a neoliberal elitist as a nominee is basically guaranteeing a Donald Trump victory. Now, it's going to be hard to defeat Donald Trump. I think he's beatable. I'm not going to underestimate him like I did back in 2016. But we need to make sure that we nominate the best candidate, the most electable candidate. And the candidate who's most electable is going to be someone who goes after non-voters, people who've stayed home, people who are young, who are getting out to vote for the first time, who are excited to come out. And that person is Bernie Sanders. So Pete Buttigieg, I mean, as I see him surge, I'm watching in horror because not only is he bad for the Democratic Party, again, the dude's going to lose to Trump. So if you're a Pete Buttigieg supporter, think long and hard about your decision to support him because this elitist is going to get crushed by Donald Trump. And I don't want to have to say I told you so, but you should have learned the lesson that 2016 taught us. And if you still haven't learned that lesson, that electing a neoliberal centrist isn't going to get people excited, regardless if we're making history, regardless if, it's the first gay president, that's not going to do it. That's not going to excite people. We need someone who's going to deliver on policy. Pete Buttigieg, his centrism, those days are gone. We're moving on past centrism and triangulation. It's precisely what will facilitate a second term for Donald Trump and a permanent capture of the Supreme Court. I mean, if Trump appoints 1 or 2 more justices, kiss all your civil rights and civil liberties goodbye. So, people who are voting for Pete Buttigieg, you're playing with fire.